Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. It's really a pleasure to sort of talk to our youth and explain sort of the careers and about our project, Vineyard Wind, the first project that we're working on. It's a really exciting industry. It's new. There's lots to be done with offshore wind, so I think you're coming in at sort of the ground level, and it's a really exciting place to be. So my name is Tiffany Ferreira. I am based in New Bedford at Vineyard Wind. I'm a project administrator. I work on the permitting of this project, as well as stakeholder engagement and other project development activities. So I think it makes a lot of sense to sort of start out by talking about our first project, the one that we're working on now. So you may have heard us sort of in the headlines as this is rapidly developing and there's lots of news around it. So we're developing the first utility-scale offshore wind renewable energy project. So you can see here on the bottom of the image, those are where the turbine locations could potentially be. And the dark purple line is the export cable, which is going to bring the power that we generate offshore back to Massachusetts. So the project is 800 megawatts, and it's located about 14 miles south of the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And the turbines we're using are 9.5 megawatt turbines, so that's a really large turbines. We'll talk about the sizes of that a little bit more in the next slide. But that's the largest commercially available turbine. So just like computers, you can go buy a computer at the store, sort of turbines, that's the largest commercially available turbine, which is probably going to change in a couple of months or so, just because of how fast the industry is moving. So there's lots of jobs and designing around these new parts and new equipment. So lots of different positions that I'll talk about sort of throughout the presentation. We'll be doing our construction mainly out of New Bedford, but we will be using other local ports. We sort of selected sort of a suite of ports that we could be using during the construction. And the operations and maintenance, so when the project is operating for 20-25 years, it will be maintained out of Vineyard Haven in Martha's Vineyard. So that's sort of logistically a little bit closer to the site where the wind farm will be located. So previous presenters sort of set me up and said, you know, these areas where we'll be placing turbines were determined by the federal government, by BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. So that's sort of where we've decided to put the turbines, is because that's in our lease area that we have access to developing. So it's specifically a spot that's located for developing offshore wind projects. And we'll bring the power, as I said, back to shore in Massachusetts in Barnstable. So it's going to a location where they need a lot of power, and so we're going to supply it. As I mentioned, the turbines are really large. They're going to be just under 700 feet tall. So from the sea surface to the top of the tipped blade, they'll be just about 700 feet. The turbines that I'm showing here are monopiles, so that's a single foundation that goes into the sea floor. The Block Island wind turbines are called jacket foundations, so slightly different technology, but it's what secures the turbines to the sea floor. The turbines will be connected in strings and then centralized at the electrical service platform, or the ESP. So you see there's strings of, I don't know, 10 turbines or so going back to the little yellow dots. So those little yellow dots would be the electrical service platform. So the way that you permit a project like this is you sort of say, here's our maximum case scenario, and as the project becomes more developed, you start to refine your envelope and make decisions about, okay, we don't need all of these turbines, we can use less. So those decisions are currently happening and will be ongoing throughout the remainder of the summer. We'll be connecting the power back to Barnstable, where like I said, they really need it. The grid is a little bit weak there, so we'll actually be helping to support the grid by going to that location. It's actually one of the locations that is closest to where our area is that can handle 800 megawatts of power. It's a really big utility scale energy project. So there's only certain places where that much power can actually go. There's lots of benefits associated with offshore wind. I won't go through these in painful detail, but I'll just sort of talk about some that you might be familiar with. So we'll be reducing carbon emissions by about 1.6 million tons per year. That's equivalent to removing over 325,000 automobiles off the road in one shot. So it's really sort of the idea that we can reduce our emissions in large scales by these projects. There'll be savings to the ratepayers, and as I mentioned, we're bringing the power to a place that really needs it. So in the winter months, where we are needing a lot of natural gas to heat our homes, offshore wind can offset some of those, some of that usage. So it reduces the dirtiest plants that we have to use when we need more energy to help get that little bit extra that we need. And it's also centering the offshore wind industry in this area. So as I showed you on the project map, you can almost see Newport sort of from that map. So we are sort of the center of the offshore wind industry right now, with Rhode Island having the first project in state waters and our project sort of being the first in federal waters. So to build a project like this, I said I'd worked on the permitting. Here's sort of what we need to do for permitting. Don't worry, there's no quiz on this later. You don't need to know what any of these acronyms mean unless you want to work in the wind industry, and then you should know. But so there's extensive reviews that happen at both the federal and state level. So a lot of people, a lot of really smart people are looking at this project. So it's reviewed by the state of Massachusetts. It's reviewed by the state of Rhode Island during the federal consistency process. And we're currently, we're actually really moving along through the federal process, which is determined by BOEM. So we've been permitting for about 2 years now. So it doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of hard work. There's over 20,000 pages of permitting documents that are written to help explain how we're going to install, construct, operate this wind farm over the next 20, 25 years, as well as take it down. Decommissioning is also included in there, so I don't want to forget that. But so you can see there's lots of different reviews. Some of the agencies you might recognize, so BOEM, that's the big one, that's the big federal agency that we've talked about. But you've also got the FAA. Who knows what that stands for? Exactly, FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. So they care about how tall things are. If planes are going by, they don't want to go by a very tall crane, or they need to know about it. So that's why we need to consult with the FAA. The U.S. Coast Guard, UNSDG, that's up there. It's really important, navigational safety. It's really important that we can coexist with all users of the ocean, both people and animals. So EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, they care about what emissions our vessels will be emitting. All of these things are being taken into consideration by the various agencies. So it's a very extensive process. So hopefully the slide does that for you. So I have a video here about how this all comes together, which maybe we'll just let you take a look at. Just play a little bit of it so you get to sort of see sort of these jack-up barges coming in, installing the foundations. So as she mentioned, this is sort of an animation of what you saw earlier. So those jack-up barges, they're installing the foundations. The yellow piece here is the transition piece. That houses a lot of the marking and lighting equipment that we need to sort of light the bottom of the turbine. There's also going to be some signage on there to tell boaters what the air draft is, so how much space in between the seafloor and the bottom tip of the rotor blade, so that way they make sure if they're tall, they stay away, but it's going to be quite the distance between that. Here's the turbine base actually being installed. That piece right there, that's the nacelle. So I just want to point out these are Siemens turbines. We will be using MH Vestas turbines, but this video I really feel shows sort of the scale of this construction project in the marine environment. It's pretty fascinating how it all comes together, and there's a lot of science, technology, engineering, math. It all comes together in this type of project. And as you can imagine, this video is showing a nice sunny day, but is it always nice and sunny? No. So there's going to be a lot of training, safety training, that's going to be needed to work offshore because it's in a marine environment. There's a whole nother layer of safety that we need to be concerned with. Electrical. The wind turbine technicians, there's probably 10 or 15 different types of wind turbine technicians depending on what aspect you want to work on. the blades being installed. Just picture now you're up, about 600 feet into the air, placing all of these parts together. I'm going to stop here just in the sake of time, but hopefully you'll be able to get the link from your presentation, and you can watch the full video on how it's installed if that's interesting to you. And I'll just end sort of briefly with some careers in offshore wind. So you don't have to be on the turbines, you don't have to be offshore. There's lots of finance, accounting, management, legal, public policy, communications, explaining to people about the project, telling them how it's going to all come together. Fisheries, the science behind fisheries, pre-construction, post-construction, during construction, all of those studies are super important, and there's lots of different career paths. Engineering, you could be offshore collecting data about the ocean floor, both what it looks like and what's actually underneath. GIS software, health and safety, and that sort of leads me, I brought my intern with me today. She's recently graduated from Mass Maritime Academy with health, safety, and environmental protection. Hopefully I got that right. So I'm excited to have her here with me, and we're excited to take your questions at the end. And this is just sort of a home video that I took while at the base of the Block Island Wind Farm. So thank you.